It all started, as many things do, with a tweet. On Sunday, Marco Rubio claimed that one of his canvassers was attacked by, quote, 4 animals who told him Republicans weren't allowed in their Florida neighborhood. Rubio tweeted again this morning saying thugs told this canvasser that he couldn't be in their neighborhood because he was a Republican. Now, assault is assault, and it shouldn't happen to anyone, but Rubio's never been the most reliable narrator. The police report makes no mention of a political dispute, nor does it indicate that the canvasser was targeted for being a Republican. Even the assailant's mom, a registered Republican herself, is rejecting Rubio's account, saying her son doesn't know anything about politics and has never even voted. Oh, and it turns out this canvasser, Christopher Monzon, is a right-wing activist who attended the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. At a separate protest in Florida, he was arrested for lunging at a crowd with a Confederate flag. He's a former member of the white nationalist group Florida League of the South. And when reporters from the Miami New Times tried to interview him at the hospital, members of the Proud Boys were there, and they refused to let the reporters enter his room. And that's not even where the story ends. The HuffPost has reported that the Republican Party paid Monzon more than $10,000 between June and September, according to federal campaign finance records. That's right, a white supremacist on the Republican payroll. Just another day in Florida. Joining me now, Democratic pollster, strategist, and MSNBC political analyst, FERNAND. I'll just ask for your thoughts.
Well, Joy, I mean, even by weird Florida standards, this is pretty bizarre and strange. And, you know, it's, I guess, easy to dismiss at the surface level Marco Rubio engaged in situational hypocrisy. We certainly, as you said, no one condones any type of violence. But it's curious that Marco Rubio is making a big case out of this situation, and he's quick to call 2 people thugs and animals. Yet when it comes to the actions of January 6th, a curious silence and downplaying by Mr. Rubio. So just on this first surface, it seems like the little Marco doth protest too much. But Joe, I think the 2 questions that I think are stranger here, and really questions that are worth investigating and asking, number one, why is the Republican Party of Florida paying $10,000 to an avowed white supremacist, someone who goes by the name the Cuban Confederate, that, as you said, participated in hate rallies and engaged in their electoral efforts now in the midterms? And I think the third most important question, if Rubio is engaged in conspiracy theory mongering, as you say, engaged in false narratives about what the police reports is not reflecting, but creating an environment, Joy, where all of a sudden he's trying to suggest that Proud Boy-like individuals like Mr. Monzon are suddenly under attack, is he inflaming conditions in a state where we already have something known as the Stand Your Ground law, which says if you feel threatened, all of a sudden you can fire a gun and shoot someone in, quote, self-defense? And is Rubio kind of creating and stoking these passions that might lead to violence with Proud Boys and other avowed white supremacists who all of a sudden are going to use this story as a pretext to, quote, defend themselves whenever they feel that they might be under attack in the manner that this story is being raised? I think it's very disturbing along those lines, Joy.
Absolutely, and the mom is disputing any of it. I mean, I'm tempted to ask which Marco Rubio. I mean, we've talked about this a lot. I mean, Marco Rubio starts out as this Jeb Bush Republican, then he is the king of the Tea Party, then he's an anti-Trump Republican, then he's Trump's poodle. He's kind of anything he needs to be. It isn't surprising to me that he would be fine with having a white supremacist, white nationalist who's got the Proud Boys guarding his hospital room, room on his team. But I wonder about the sort of bigger picture here, particularly in Miami-Dade, where you've got the Proud Boys essentially taking over the Republican Party there. They're literally in power in the official Republican Party. How deep is this merger at this point between Proud Boys, QAnoners, other white nationalists, and the Republicans in South Florida?
Oh, well, I mean, it's a wholesale merged enterprise, if you will. What makes it even worse, Joy, is that you have members of Congress, Republican senators and officials in Florida, not a single one has denounced the Proud Boys that have entered the leadership of the local Republican Party in South Florida. Let's think about that for a second. The Proud Boys have been classified as a domestic terrorist organization. The leader of the Proud Boys is in jail for seditious conspiracy. One of his deputies pled guilty to seditious conspiracy in the events of January 6th. And you have this paramilitary violent organization involved in the running of the South Florida Republican Party, and none of the members of the Florida delegation on the Republican side, certainly not Republican senators or any Republican officials, have denounced them.
Yeah.
It is an outrageous story in a state that continues to follow this MAGA Republican track, and more importantly, with a signal that in Florida, if you're a MAGA Republican, whether you're violent or not, you're on safe ground here. You will be protected in Florida.
And what is Marco Rubio said about this? He's running against an actual former police officer, a former police chief in Val Demings, and yet you've got these police organizations endorsing him. What about on a law and order front? Has he had anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, remember, Marco Rubio is a sock puppet. He will say what the hand in his mouth asks him to say on that day, with whatever talking points or, you know, unhinged Bible verses he's going to use to justify the unjustifiable. Marco Rubio at this point doesn't really matter. I'll tell you what is scary, though. Law enforcement officials in Florida decided to back Marco Rubio over Val Demings, one of their own, who was a former police chief.
Yeah.
And it calls into question, in the same way we're wondering about the Supreme Court in the United States, I think those are legitimate questions about law enforcement here in South Florida when they're siding with someone like Marco Rubio, who doesn't seem to have a problem when law enforcement is attacked or loses their lives in the rally on January 6th.
And I will remind folks that Enrique Tarrio, who we talk about a lot on the show, was the head of Latinos for Trump. He was already involved in official Republican politics before the insurrection, and they were fine with his presence, fine with it. He has other issues and incidents in his past as well. It's scary stuff. Fernand, my friend, thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here. And we'll be